There are moments in sport that stop even the greatest legends cold. Not because of the scoreline, not because of the trophy on the line, but because something happens in front of them that they simply cannot explain. Something raw, something electric, something that reaches past the game itself and grabs you somewhere deep. Roberto Baggio has felt that feeling before. He knows what it means to carry a nation. He knows what it costs. He spent an entire career being the man Italy turned to when everything was on the line, when the pressure was suffocating, when failure was not an option. He has heard the San Siro shake during a Milan derby in the final minutes. He has felt the silence of a World Cup stadium holding its breath as he stepped toward a penalty spot with everything at stake. He has lived through moments that defined not just his career, but an entire era of world football. And yet, on a warm afternoon in Rome in May 2026, Roberto Baggio walked into a tennis stadium and stopped dead in his tracks. What he saw was not what he expected. What he felt was something he had not experienced in years. And what he witnessed over the next 2 hours would leave the divine ponytail quietly reflecting on the nature of greatness long after the crowd had gone home. This is the story of the day Alex Eala conquered Rome and reminded one of football's most legendary figures exactly why he fell in love with sport in the first place. The Foro Italico is one of the most beautiful sports venues in the world. Nestled along the banks of the Tiber River, with marble statues lining its grounds and the hills of Rome rising behind it, it carries the kind of history that makes you walk a little slower just to take it all in. On most days during the Italian Open, it operates exactly as you would expect a prestigious clay court tennis tournament to operate: sophisticated, polished, quietly elegant. May 8th, 2026 was not one of those days. From the moment Roberto Baggio approached the Pietrangeli court that afternoon, something felt completely different. The noise reached him before he even entered the stands, a rhythmic, thunderous chant pulsing through the Roman air with a force that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath his feet. Laban Alex, Laban Alex, Laban Alex, over and over, relentless, passionate, and impossibly loud for a tennis match on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of the Italian capital. When he stepped inside, the sight that greeted him was one he would later admit he was completely unprepared for. Philippine flags were everywhere, not scattered here and there the way traveling fans sometimes appear at major tournaments, with a few banners and some painted faces. These flags covered the stands entirely. They hung from shoulders, they were painted across smiling faces, they waved from every corner of the Pietrangeli court with a pride and energy that transformed the entire atmosphere of the venue. Fans had traveled from across Europe, some even further, all of them converging on the Italian capital for one reason: to watch a 20-year-old from Manila play tennis. Baggio scanned the crowd in disbelief. The Italian football icon, his iconic ponytail now streaked with gray, stood quietly for a moment, taking in the scene around him. Then he turned to a nearby tournament official and asked, with the calm bewilderment of a man who has genuinely seen everything sport has to offer, a simple question: "What is this?" The official had seen this reaction before. Other famous faces had walked into this atmosphere during the Italian Open and experienced exactly the same moment of stunned silence. He smiled and gave Baggio the only answer that made any sense. "This is Alex," he said. "She is from the Philippines, and wherever she plays, her people follow." Baggio said nothing for a moment. He simply looked back at the stands, at the flags, at the thousands of faces chanting with everything they had for a young woman who wasn't even on court yet. Then he found his seat, leaned forward, and waited. He had absolutely no idea what was about to unfold in front of him. The match that day had all the makings of a comfortable straight sets win for the higher-ranked player. On paper, at least, Wang Xinyu held every significant advantage, seeded 31st in the tournament. Coming off a first-round bye that had kept her fresh and sharp, the Chinese star had spent her preparation time watching film and preparing for exactly the kind of aggressive, emotional opponent that Eala represented. Eala, by contrast, was running on fumes. Just days earlier, she had battled through more than 2 grueling hours against Magdalena Frech in a match that pushed her to the absolute limit of her physical and mental reserves. The kind of match that leaves its mark on your legs, your serve, and your concentration. The kind of match that makes the next one feel twice as long before it even starts. Roberto Baggio recognized the signs immediately. Few people in world sport understand the physical language of exhaustion better than a man who spent his entire career performing at the highest level under impossible pressure. During his time at Juventus and AC Milan, Baggio developed an almost instinctive ability to read opponents, to identify exactly when a player was mentally broken versus simply running on empty. It was a skill built not from coaching manuals, but from experience, from being the player everyone looked to when the tank was nearly dry and there was still a mountain left to climb. What he saw in Eala during those early games confirmed what he suspected. She was tired, genuinely, visibly tired in the way that only comes from leaving everything on the court in your previous match. Her movement was slightly slower than usual. Her ground strokes landed shorter than she intended. The usual sharpness in her attacking game was dulled, at least for now, by the weight of the hours she had already spent on clay that week. But her eyes told a completely different story. That was the detail that caught Baggio's attention and refused to let it go, because in all his years of studying athletes under pressure, he had learned that the body lies and the eyes tell the truth. And Eala's eyes, even as Wang began dismantling her serve with aggressive precision in the opening games, never showed defeat. They showed fatigue, yes, they showed the strain of the moment, but they never once showed surrender. Wang, for her part, started the match like a player who had something to prove. Her ground strokes were surgical, her footwork was flawless. She dictated every rally from the baseline with the kind of calm, controlled aggression that top 30 players carry into matches against opponents they believe they should defeat. She broke Eala's serve in the first game, then again in the third, and suddenly the scoreboard showed what the crowd had feared most. 3-0, Wang leading. The Pietrangeli court, so loud and so alive just minutes ago, began to tighten with a very different kind of energy. The chants softened, not disappeared, never disappeared, but transformed from thunder into something more fragile. Nervous murmurs passed through the Philippine flags still waving in the stands. Fans who had traveled hundreds of miles to be in that stadium exchanged worried glances as the match threatened to slip away before it had barely begun. Roberto Baggio leaned further forward in his seat, and he watched. Athletes who have never experienced a genuine comeback from the edge don't fully understand what it requires. It is not simply a matter of playing better tennis, or running faster, or hitting harder. Those things matter, but they are symptoms of something deeper. A comeback at the highest level of sport requires a specific kind of internal decision. A moment, invisible to everyone watching, where the athlete chooses not to accept the story being written for them.
Baggio knew that moment intimately. He had lived it more times than he could count. The 1994 FIFA World Cup remains one of the most stunning individual tournament performances in football history. And what is often forgotten about that run is how close it came to never happening. Italy struggled badly in the group stage. The press was merciless. Questions surrounded the squad, surrounding the manager, surrounding Baggio himself. Then something shifted. He took control of the tournament in a way that felt almost supernatural. A dramatic late winner against Nigeria that sent Italy through in extra time. A display of breathtaking quality against Spain in the quarterfinals. An unforgettable performance against Bulgaria in the semifinals that carried his nation on pure willpower to the final in Pasadena. It was the kind of run that cannot be explained by tactics alone. It required something that exists in a very small number of athletes across any generation. The refusal, when everything is screaming at you to accept defeat, to simply keep going anyway. He saw that same refusal in Eala, beginning in the fourth game. Nobody in the stadium could pinpoint exactly when it happened because the best shifts in momentum never announced themselves cleanly. One moment, Wang was in total control. The next, the rallies were suddenly longer, the errors were suddenly on the other side of the net, and the energy inside the Foro Italico was beginning, slowly and then all at once, to completely transform. Eala's ground strokes, which had been landing soft and cautious through the first 3 games, started finding the corners with a confidence that had been absent earlier. The hesitation disappeared, the aggression returned. Rallies that Wang had been winning with ease became exhausting baseline exchanges, and one by one, then in quick succession, Eala started winning them. 4 straight games, back-to-back breaks of Wang's serve in the 4th and 6th games. The set, which had looked so comfortable for the Chinese star just 20 minutes earlier, was suddenly and completely flipped. The Pietrangeli court came alive in a way that even the people inside it struggled to describe afterward. The chants returned at full volume, the Philippine flags found new energy, and from his seat in the stands, Roberto Baggio was no longer leaning forward quietly. He was on his feet. Witnesses near him later reported hearing him speak almost to himself as Eala broke serve again to seal the set, words quiet enough to be lost in the surrounding noise, but distinct enough to catch. "This is not just talent," he reportedly said, his eyes still fixed on the court below. "This is something else." The second set told a story of a player who had found herself completely. Whatever physical exhaustion remained, whatever doubt had crept into the opening games was gone. Eala played with a freedom and a ferocity that seemed to surprise even the crowd that had come specifically to support her. She moved with conviction, she struck with authority, and against a player seated 31 places above her in the rankings, she made it look not easy exactly, but inevitable. Wang fought. She is a quality player, and she pushed Eala through several difficult moments in that second set, refusing to go quietly. But momentum at that level of sport carries its own weight, and Eala's momentum by that point had the entire Foro Italico behind it. 6 games to 3, straight sets, a victory that sent 20,000 people into an eruption of noise that rolled off the marble statues surrounding the arena and up into the warm Roman sky. Baggio stood with them. He applauded long and genuinely, the way athletes applaud for other athletes when they recognize something true. Not politely, not with a detached appreciation of a spectator watching an impressive performance from a safe distance. He applauded the way you do when something in front of you reaches past the sport itself and connects to something you remember feeling a long time ago. Even after the match ended and Eala walked the court acknowledging her fans, Baggio did not leave. Long after many spectators had begun filtering toward the exits, the divine ponytail remained in his seat, still watching, still processing, still sitting with whatever the last 2 hours had stirred in him. Those closest to him said he looked completely absorbed, like a man not ready to let the feeling go just yet. When journalists eventually approached him, many expected a technical breakdown of the match, an analysis of Eala's forehand, or her clay court movement, or the tactical adjustments she had made against a higher-ranked opponent. Coming from Roberto Baggio, that kind of expert football-to-tennis crossover assessment would have made for a perfectly reasonable soundbite and a straightforward story. But Baggio went somewhere else entirely. He spoke slowly and with the measured calm that has always defined his public presence, the same quiet intensity that once made him one of the most feared competitors in world football. And what he said was not about technique at all. "I have been in stadiums all over the world," he began.
I have heard the San Siro during a Milan derby in the final minutes. I have heard the Stadio Olimpico erupt after dramatic goals, but I have never experienced anything like this." He paused, then looked back toward the stands, where Philippine flags were still waving long after the match had ended. These people are not just fans, they are family, and she feels that. You can see it in the way she fights. She is not playing for rankings or money, she is playing for them. He then described what he had observed during the most critical moments of the opening set, the 3-0 deficit, the broken serves, the momentum threatening to spiral completely away from the young Filipina. He spoke about watching her fall behind and sensing, in the way only someone who has experienced genuine pressure understands, that she was not going to fold. When she was down 3-0, many players would have folded. They would have accepted the situation. They would have mentally stepped away from the match, conserved energy, moved on. She didn't. She fought point by point, game by game, until everything changed. He stopped. His gaze drifted to where Eala was still signing autographs for a seemingly endless line of fans, smiling through each one of them with the kind of energy that made you forget she had just spent the better part of 2 intense sets on a clay court. "That is not something you can teach," Baggio said finally. "That is something you are born with." The comparison he drew next was one he did not make lightly. Roberto Baggio has shared the pitch with Paolo Maldini, with Marco van Basten, with Gabriel Batistuta, with Ronaldo. He competed in an era of world football that produced some of the most remarkable individual talents the sport has ever seen. He is not a man who reaches for comparisons casually or distributes praise without earning it first. But as he spoke about Eala's refusal to accept defeat, something in his voice shifted. It became quieter, more personal, like a man not speaking to journalists anymore, but speaking to something inside himself. He said, "During the 1994 World Cup, I was carrying Italy. The pressure was unlike anything I had felt before or since. Every match felt like the last. Every moment felt like it could be the end. And I remember deciding in each of those moments that I was not going to accept the end. I was going to keep going." He looked back toward the court.
"She reminds me of that decision," he said. "Not the football, not the sport. The decision. That moment inside where you choose not to fold." For those who understand Baggio's career, the depth of that comparison is difficult to overstate. The 1994 World Cup is still considered one of the greatest individual tournament performances in football history. Against Nigeria, against Spain, against Bulgaria, he delivered at every single moment when Italy needed him most, carrying a squad and a nation through pressure that would have broken most players long before the final whistle. Watching a 20-year-old from Manila make the same internal decision in the 4th game of an Italian Open second-round match in front of 20,000 screaming Filipino fans apparently brought all of that rushing back. He admitted it openly, which for someone of Baggio's composed public nature was itself a telling detail. "Watching her fight her way back into that match," he said quietly, "woke up emotions I had not felt in years." The moment that stayed with journalists most came when Baggio was asked about the crowd itself. Not Eala specifically, but the atmosphere she creates everywhere she plays. The flags, the chants, the sheer improbable spectacle of 20,000 people turning a clay court tennis match in Rome into something that felt like a national event for a country located 11,000 kilometers away. He took his time with the answer. "In football," he began carefully, "the crowd reacts to moments, a goal, a save, a tackle. The emotion rises and falls in waves. That is how stadiums work. That is what you expect." He paused. Here, it was different. His gaze moved back to the stands, where Philippine flags were still waving nearly an hour after the final point had been played. The energy doesn't spike or fall. It stays. It just exists. From the first point to the last, those people were not reacting to what was happening on the court. They were shaping it. Every chant,
every flag, every breath they took together seemed to push her forward, as if the stadium itself refused to let her lose. He was quiet for a moment, then said something that no one present was quite prepared for. "I have never seen anything like this, not in over 30 years of professional football." From Roberto Baggio, that sentence carries a weight that is almost impossible to fully appreciate. 30 years, the San Siro, the Stadio delle Alpi, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, the biggest stages world football has ever offered. And a 20-year-old tennis player in Rome had produced something he could not place anywhere in 3 decades of sporting memory. Before he left the Foro Italico, journalists asked whether he had any message for Eala herself, advice perhaps, from one athlete who has carried a nation to another just beginning to understand what that weight truly means. Baggio was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice had softened completely. The quiet intensity was still there, but beneath it was something warmer, something that sounded almost like recognition, like one warrior seeing another clearly for the first time. "Tell her to never lose this," he said. He did not elaborate immediately. He let the words sit. The connection with the fans, the joy she plays with, the fight in her heart, these are things that cannot be replaced. Trophies come and go, rankings rise and fall, but the love of the people, that stays forever. He paused, then added one more thought, quietly, almost to himself. "I carried Italy on my shoulders once. It was heavy, heavier than any trophy, but I would not trade it for anything." Another pause, then with a directness that left no room for interpretation. "She carries the Philippines on her shoulders too, and she is only 20 years old, and she's doing it with a smile." He stood to leave. Then he stopped, turned back one final time, the way people do when there is one last thing that needs to be said, one last thought that cannot be left in that stadium.
"She is special," Roberto Baggio said quietly. "Not because she wins, but because of how she makes people feel when she plays. That is rare. That is something that cannot be coached." Then he turned and walked away from the Foro Italico. The Divine Ponytail has scored 205 Serie A goals. He has lifted 2 Scudetti. He has been named FIFA World Player of the Year. He has stood at the absolute summit of world football and looked out at everything that summit has to offer. And yet, on a warm Thursday afternoon in Rome, far removed from football and everything it gave him, a 20-year-old from Manila made him feel something he admitted he had not felt in a very long time. Not nostalgia, he said when pressed to name it. Hope. He let the word settle. The kind of hope that comes from watching someone who refuses to give up, no matter the score, no matter the odds. He paused one final time, and then he added the words that would travel far beyond the marble statues of the Foro Italico, far beyond Rome, far beyond Italy, and reach all the way to the 11,000 kilometers of ocean separating that clay court from the country whose flag had covered every corner of the Pietrangeli stands. The Philippines' flags were still waving when he said it. The chants had never really stopped. And somewhere on the other side of that same clay court, a 20-year-old from Manila was still smiling, still signing autographs, still giving every last drop of herself to the people who had crossed an ocean just to watch her play. Roberto Baggio has seen the best of the best. He has stood among legends and competed at the highest level sport can offer. But as he walked away from the Foro Italico that afternoon, he carried something with him that no trophy, no ranking, and no accolade could have given him. The reminder that greatness, true greatness, is not measured by what you win. It is measured by what you make people feel. And on May 8, 2026, in Rome, Alex Eala made Roberto Baggio feel hope. That might be the greatest victory of all. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Has any athlete ever made you feel the way Eala made Baggio feel that afternoon in Rome? And subscribe to stay with us for every story that goes beyond the scoreline.